It's finally here, the start of the Jed Fish era, and most importantly, the start of the season. It's game day. This is the Wildcat Sports Report podcast. Arizona opens the 2021 season with a showdown against traditional West Coast rival BYU, although they haven't shared a conference in forever. These two seem to match up every few years, with the Cougars getting the edge the last few seasons. They renewed their rivalry a few years ago with BYU getting wins in Tucson and in Glendale. And now they'll face off the first college football game at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas, home of the Raiders and many other great events, is obviously Vegas known for that. And when you build a 70,000-seat state-of-the-art arena, you're going to have a lot of cool events there, and one of those is Arizona and BYU. Before we jump into that, let's touch on some things going on. I've seen a little bit of Twitter chatter on the depth chart, which I covered a little bit in the last podcast, with guys who got talked up in fall camp, but then suddenly aren't on the 2 deep or even the 3 deep. Something to remember. A player can play well and do good things and draw the attention of coaches and still not ever overcome other players or fall back on the depth chart. They're not mutually exclusive. In fall camp, we heard some love for a guy like Dorian Springer, the freshman wide receiver, for a guy like Colby Cage. Yet Cage is buried a little bit on the linebacker depth chart, and we don't even see Springer appear on the depth chart. So, seeing some people very critical of the coaches for mentioning that. But it doesn't mean they weren't good. They were in a good spot then. It could be they did a few good things, deserve some recognition, or it could be that they never advanced beyond that showcase. There's so many things that go into football. I look at, again, I always bring up the Kansas City Chiefs because I follow them religiously. At the start of training camp, they had a rookie free agent safety from Western Kentucky named Devin Key. Everyone was raving about Key, how great he was playing. He was a surefire guy to make the 53-man roster. And for the first 2 weeks of camp, he was working with the ones and the twos. Then a funny thing happened. The first preseason game where he got burned for an 80-yard touchdown. He continued to struggle in games while at the same times other veteran players overcame injury in the case of a guy like Juan Thornhill, or you had other guys just start to play a little bit better, or as new things were introduced, were better at those new things than Key. Key, who was a surefire bet to make the 53-man roster 2 weeks before the first preseason game, was cut after the last preseason game and signed to the practice squad. So these things happen. So it may be very well that a guy like Dorian Singer was great early in camp. But as more things are introduced, as more concepts are introduced, maybe he didn't get them. Or maybe other receivers leapfrogged him. Or maybe there's just something missing from his game that keeps him from rising up the depth chart. We all see that a guy might be a physical specimen. Maybe he can make great catch, great hands, runs good routes. Maybe he doesn't make the right reads pre-snap. Post-snap reads. So many of the things in these modern offenses are based on post-snap reads. I know so many of us played, Pop Warner back in the day when you ran a 5 and out. You ran a drag. You ran a post, and that was it. You didn't change your route. Well, now our routes are adjusted not only pre-snap but post-snap. I go back to some of the Mike Stoops era when we saw a lot of preseason camp, and it was readily apparent that a guy like Kadeem Carey was a much better ball carrier than Keola Antolin. But it wasn't until Carey got the pass blocking schemes that he could crack that starting lineup. I always use the sign of Trevin Wade, who was one of the 4 or 5 best defensive backs as a true freshman. The problem was he was about 15 pounds underweight, and the team was stock full of a good upperclassman. He just wasn't quite ready. So even though he was very good, other guys, you look at wide receivers who might be very good at route running, but not good at run blocking, or maybe they, only good at some schemes or others. Other people talk about the depth chart have to remember that so much of football now is specialized. You could have a guy who's the second or third string defensive tackle, but depending on the scheme, depending on the look you're giving, might get more snaps than the guys ahead of him on the depth chart. I did discuss this in the last podcast. If you're a linebacker, you might be the starting linebacker when you run your base 4-3, but you're not as good in space. And so when you go to your 4-2 with the Viper, maybe you're not playing as much. And if you're stuck in that Viper scheme far more than you are in your base 4-3, you're not going to get as much playing time. Maybe you're a better pass rush defensive end than a run stopping defensive end. And suddenly you find yourself getting run on by BYU. BYU's trying to establish the run. Maybe you're not going to play as much. And also, again, first of all, you have to remember that the depth charts are oftentimes put together by the media relations department with consultation of the coaches. Sometimes you're trying to hide things from the other team in the depth chart. Maybe you don't want them to know what you're planning, who you're playing, who's healthy. And finally, they're fluid. So you may see a guy who just isn't ready for BYU, whether that's physically ready, scheme ready, positionally ready, but could find himself at the top of the depth chart 2-3 weeks from now. Maybe there's a better matchup against San Diego State. Maybe there's a better use of his talents against NAU. Maybe it's just a matter of getting your feet wet and getting used to the speed of the real season college football. So again, a lot was being read into that I thought too much drama over something like the first game depth chart, too many accusations and conspiracy theories, and I mean, it happens. Coaches hype a guy one week and the next week he's in the doghouse, or they hype a guy to light the fire under the guy ahead of him or behind him. A lot goes into juggling the psychology of a football team. It doesn't make a coach a liar. It doesn't mean there's a conspiracy. It simply just means that there's a reason for them saying that. Maybe it's just a kid had one really good play, and that's what you remembered when you're tired, you've been on the practice field for 3 hours, you've been at work for 12 hours, and you really just want to wrap up practice, say goodbye to the media, and get home. So give it what you will. Now, Arizona gets a BYU team that's coming off a 10-win season. They had a Heisman candidate. They were a very, very good football team a year ago, and they had huge roster turnover. I think I read one stat where they're among the leaders in new starters, they're among the leaders in loss of production. Obviously losing Zach Wilson, who was a top NFL draft pick and will start in about a week for the Jets. That's a lot to lose, but they're also they have a pretty good program in place with head coach Kalani Sitake, who, again, they can just plug pieces and continue to build. They have, obviously, a slightly older team. I think that is a very overblown aspect, but they are on average, about a year and a half older than most college football teams. They bring back some key players. They lost a lot of key players. Obviously, the quarterback position is the key one for this team. Jaron Hall gets the call to replace Zach Wilson at quarterback. Hall is a fourth-year sophomore. Played in just 2 games in 2018. Did not throw a pass that season. 2019, he did see some action playing in 5 games, including 2 pretty good stints against Utah State and University of South Florida, where he had about 39 passes in those 2 games. All told, in 2019 season, he battled some injuries. He was 31 of 46 for 420 yards and a touchdown. He could also run a little bit. He's a pretty mobile quarterback. He amassed 139 yards that season. But this is also a guy who missed all of last year with an injury. Missed part of 2019 with an injury, and obviously last year he would have been behind Zach Wilson anyways. But here is a guy you wonder how much is the injury a concern? Is he a guy who, despite being a mobile quarterback, are they a little bit afraid to run him, or do they feel pretty comfortable that he's over those concerns and is a guy that you can use as, I don't want to say a dual threat, because they're never going to be a pure dual threat team, but as a guy who can get outside the pocket, who can pick up some key yards, some first downs. I mean, obviously, you look at that South Florida game from 2019, the guy had 16 carries. Obviously, some of those were sacks, but he picked up 83 yards on the ground. So again, a guy who can do some damage with his legs. Not the biggest guy, 6'1", 205. So again, I always say that, the height is the most overrated thing in durability, but 205 is a a good-sized quarterback, but not a brick house quarterback. But again, a good athlete, good passer, seems to be accurate, and he is a guy who will be counted on. Arizona is going to need to get pressure on him because although he does have some experience, it's basically been about a year and a half since he's played football, almost 2 full years. I guess his last game was in November of 2019. New personnel, new looks, things like that. So it'll be up to Arizona to try to pressure him, try to make him make mistakes. But he has more experience than anyone Arizona has passing the football. Where they get very interesting now is some of their skill position, and most notably, they got 2 pretty good tight ends, Isaac Rex and Dallin Holker. Rex is 6'6", 247. He got 12 touchdowns last season, just a big target. Holker's a little bit smaller, a little more athletic, and he had 19 catches for 235 yards a few years ago as a true freshman. He's coming back off his church mission. But the 2 of those guys really pose some matchup problems, as the tight end often does. Arizona's going to have to use their linebackers, use that Viper position. It'll be very interesting to see how much they go with the 2 tight end set, which again could pose some problems for Arizona. Now, with Arizona being able to go do that 4-2 with the Viper or even use the nickel, they do have some athletes out there who you hope can keep up with the tight ends, especially again with the 2 differing players when you have one big guy, one small guy. I shouldn't say small. I mean, the guy's not tiny, but he's speedier. So that will, again, provide some issues for the Arizona defense. The good news for also BYU is they return running back Tyler Algier. Algier averaged 7.5 yards per carry last year. He rushed for over 1,100 yards. He had 13 touchdowns. He is a very, very good running back, a guy who is a key focal point of the offense. And against Arizona's less experienced front 4, you could see them really try to establish that running game. They also have Lopini Katoa returning. Katoa is a guy who last year was their second leading rusher with over 400 yards and 5 scores. He averaged only 5.5 yards per carry. So that's a good 1-2 punch at running back for the Cougars, and something that Arizona is going to have to deal with. If that wasn't enough, they returned one of their top receivers from last year as well, Gunnar Romney, who was second in the team in receiving, 767 yards on 39 catches, almost 20 yards per catch. Now, he only had 2 scores, but that was because the big tight end Rex and the now since departed Dax Milne also led the team with a combined 20 touchdowns. And Romney is not alone, as Neil Pa'au also returns. He had 45 grabs last year for 603 yards and 4 scores. So again, a good 1-2 punch at running back. If that's not enough, both Katoa and Algier had a combined 37 catches out of the backfield. So those guys alone provide enough of a threat. Now, when obviously losing a guy like Milne, losing a guy like Zach Wilson hurts, but when you still bring back guys who can do things on the offensive end, who have done things on the offensive end, that's a real challenge for Arizona. Now, Arizona counters with the fact that there's not a whole lot of film on them. A lot of the players have not played, or at least haven't played in a year, and they're bigger, faster, stronger, you hope. Don Brown's defense, while it will certainly resemble what he's used at other places like Michigan, could be different. You see how they utilize the scheme. So Arizona will have somewhat the element of surprise, how they utilize the blitzes, how they use the blitz, even as a decoy could be interesting. So Arizona, again, they're going to have their work cut out for them, but at the same time, they also, have that element of surprise. Defensively, again, BYU, a solid defense. They're going to just run a lot of different looks at you. The big joke a few days ago was that they had 15 different starters listed on the depth chart. That's because they have various positions. They can go with a 3-man front. They can go with a 4-man front. They can go with less linebackers, more DBs. So Arizona's going to get a lot of looks. And I think if you're BYU, your hope is that you can confuse the Arizona quarterbacks, obviously Will Plummer has some experience. Gunnar Cruz really doesn't have a lot of experience, so they're going to try to throw a lot of looks at them. They're going to try to find matchups that work. Conversely, there's not a lot of film on Arizona. This Arizona offense, while it has elements of what Jedd Fisch did in UCLA and did at Michigan and a little bit of the NFL stuff with what he learned, especially from the Rams and to a lesser extent the Patriots last year, it's a new offense. So BYU is going to have to try to react to that offense, try to react to what Arizona is going to try and do, and frankly, try to react to the two quarterback system. That's not always the easiest thing. While, we're a little critical of Arizona not just naming one starter, wondering if that meant they didn't have a guy who really deserved to earn the job. It could also mean you have two slightly different players that you can throw at them. Plummer, a smaller player, a little bit of a guy you can run with his upper body strength, whereas Cruz is a guy who maybe throws a better deep ball, but Cruz is mobile as well. You're going to be able to throw a variety of different running back looks at them. Again, Arizona, like BYU, may be using the tight end a lot more than BYU has seen on film. In fact, you could argue that other than Woma, who was a totally different player back then, there's next to no film on the Arizona tight ends. So that's, again, another advantage for Arizona, that element of surprise. The big thing is, how does Arizona react? The guys who did play last year are coming off a 70-7 shellacking. They're coming off a season where they were really only competitive in really one game. They're riding a 12-game losing streak. Conversely, they get a BYU team coming off a great season, one in which they were 10-2, I believe, one in which they had a Heisman quarterback, but both teams will be running quarterbacks who have not played much in the last year, especially with Cruz and Hall. So that is something to keep in mind. Which is the team that can maybe settle down first? At the end of the day, the gut feeling is BYU is just better. They're probably a little more talented. They have players who've won more football games. There's a reason they're the favorite. Now, we're going to find out how much of their success last year was due to some of the players that departed. Obviously, when you have a quarterback, the ability of Zach Wilson, a guy who was top second draft pick overall, a Heisman finalist, that goes a long way. You lose a 1,000-yard receiver, you lose some other key receivers, you lose some linemen, you lose a lot on defense, but you also bring a lot back. You also bring back, again, some guys who haven't played in a couple years because they're coming back from missions. So you give BYU the edge there. You give BYU the edge in a guy who's been a head coach versus a guy who's never been a head coach. Are there some late game or late quarter decisions that they have the advantage in? I think the biggest thing is just, what does Arizona have? How much of Arizona's problems last year was talent? How much was coaching? How much, and then, frankly, how good are these new coaches? We all like everything that's been going on. We like what Jedd Fisch has done. We like the moves he's made. We love hearing Don Brown speak. How good are they going to be? And how good can they be with the talent? Are the transfers enough? Are developing young guys who maybe were underdeveloped under Sumlin enough? Can that really close the gap with a BYU team who I think will know kind of what we're going to get? And that's the big question for me. How does Arizona look early? So how does BYU win this game? They just play their game. They establish the run. They utilize the tight ends. They utilize their veteran receivers. They put their quarterback in a position where he doesn't have to make a ton of plays, or at least difficult plays. He can just play within himself. He can get comfortable. You let him throw some easy passes. You do a lot like maybe what Ohio State did the other night, getting their freshman quarterback. And although Hall has the experience, you don't run him a lot. You don't put him in a position where he's getting hit. And just let Hall be, in many ways, a game manager and let his weapons do the work for him. If you're Arizona, you want to slow down, if not stop the run. You want to be able to put pressure on Hall. You want to be able to hit Hall. You want to force him into mistakes. And that's the same game plan I think BYU has for Arizona. You want to make Gunnar Cruz uncomfortable. You want to take advantage of his inexperience. You want to take advantage of Plummer's inexperience, because frankly, he was a guy last year I didn't think looked real good. He had some flashes here and there, but for the most part, it was just okay. So you want to force them into mistakes. If you're Arizona, you have to play clean football in this game. Because again, I think BYU is better. So you have to win the turnover battle. You have to win the field position battle. You can't give up a lot of big plays. You can't commit a lot of penalties. It's boring, but it's the basics really for Arizona. Play a cleaner football game. If you are ahead at the end of the night on turnovers, on penalties, and on chunk plays, you're probably going to, if not win the football game, be right in it. You can't miss field goals, especially short field goals. You can't settle for field goals when you have good red zone opportunities. Conversely, again, you got to force BYU into mistakes. You got to force them into turnovers. You've got to get sacks. You got to put pressure on the quarterback. You got to put as much of the game into Hall's hands as you can, and then you might have a chance. I'm not big on predictions. Not going to give you a score prediction. Would I take BYU? Yes. But frankly, I might take Arizona to cover the 17.5. And that's really what I want to see. At the end of the day, and I've talked about this, I want to see Mike Stoops' first games. When Arizona was able that first year to hang with Wisconsin, when Arizona was able to hang with Utah, when Arizona was able to basically have Washington State on the ropes and just couldn't close out. That's what I want to see. I want to see Arizona hang with BYU. I want to see very little difference in overall talent level and execution. And if BYU is the better team because they're more experienced, because they've got more weapons back, then so be it. But I don't want to see them just run all over Arizona, just go crazy against Arizona. I don't want to look up and say, wow, there's just no talent here. And we might. I'm not convinced. I think Arizona has upgraded with the transfers. I think Arizona has upgraded in player development, but I need to see how much. And at the end of the day, that's it. I know people hate moral victories, but frankly, I want a moral victory. Do I want a victory? Yes. I would settle for a moral victory where I feel good about the direction of the team, where I feel good that they can, beat NAU next week and then maybe upset San Diego State and head into that conference slate with a chance to pick off 2 or 3 more football games. Now, if they can get the win against BYU, and if they can get a legitimate win against BYU, one where it's not BYU just pooping all over themselves, then suddenly maybe we start talking about Arizona as a fringe bowl team, as a team that can win 5 or 6. I don't know. That's what I want to see. Gonna wrap this up with yet another horrible father moment. It starts out kind of serious. Got a thing in the mail saying that a sex offender had moved into the neighborhood. Read the little card. If you've never seen it, they send out a postcard. Turns out he, when he was underage, but still, molested a 12-year-old boy. I have a 10-year-old son, Tyler, who I've talked about here. So I had to have a slightly uncomfortable conversation with Tyler about, things we've talked about before, but, he calls it the no-no square, but about, being smart and not letting people, touch you, and about, how people, what lies they might say and things like that, that we'd never send anyone you don't know to pick you up, and that, you don't go into some stranger's house because he has a puppy or cookies, or in my son's case, orange chicken and Pringles. About 2 hours later, he comes out of the shower and he barely has his towel on. And I look over at him and get some clothes on. Like, no one wants to see your dingus. And he looks at me dead in the eye and he says, Dad, I know one person who does. I laughed insanely. He laughed. My wife was very mad at the inappropriate joke, in which case I tried to play it off by saying, I'm just laughing uncomfortably, but damn, that was funny. So yes, my 10-year-old son basically made a child molester joke, and it was kind of funny. So that is yet another reason I am a horrible father. Hopefully we don't see horrible football on Saturday. Hopefully we see Arizona steal a win against the BYU team in Las Vegas. Hopefully the gamble to hire Jed Fish pays off. So, to the 70 or 80 U of A football players, to the hopefully about 20 or 30,000 Arizona fans all headed to Vegas, you know it. Bear down.